All right, so Aiden and I are out here today, and we just temporarily mounted the motor. We've just only got the front bolt in because we want to try and figure out exactly how to route the wiring and recreate a wiring harness and tie into any wiring that might be left on the actual go-kart itself. And unfortunately, the problem we're having right now is figuring out the location of the ignition coil. This is the replacement ignition coil. It has a place for a bolt to go through to bolt this somewhere, but we can't quite figure out exactly where. All of the electrics seem to have been on this bracket over here. There's a hole underneath here. Can't really see it, but up underneath here there's a hole that looks like it had a bolt through it. You can just see kind of like a ghost outline of where there was a bolt. So initially we thought, well, maybe it somehow went over here, but there's a lip that sticks out on the bottom here. And then we went online and we tried to look at some videos and find some information, and unfortunately we couldn't find any videos where anybody was showing the definitive location of the actual ignition coil itself. But in one video I was able to see that there was a block right here that appeared to be attached where that bolt hole is, and I think that that is the voltage regulator slash rectifier that we don't have yet. We also noticed, based on the video, well, we were able to figure out that the CDI definitely goes here because the new CDI came with this rubber strap that slips right onto this, and the old rubber strap was on there still. So we know that that's where the CDI went. We just didn't know whether or not it went in with the plugs facing that way, or did it go in with the plugs facing this way. Since we looked at another video, it looks like we've got this in backwards right now, that the plug should face this way. We just thought the plug should face that way because you've got all the connections going to the stator on that side. But apparently that's not how it goes. This remnants of this rubber right here, that's all trashed, is identical to the pretty much identical to the one that came on the replacement starter relay. So that makes us pretty confident that the starter relay is what mounts here. So all that's left is looking down from the top. There is something that must have mounted here because there's two tabs with slots in them. But that really wouldn't, be a good place to mount the ignition coil. I mean, we could mount it there, but the question is, how did it attach? So I don't know. Looks like also on the back of the bracket there's a couple of little slots here. So I wonder what that was for. I don't know. All right, so I just tried to mount this new starter relay, and the rubber ripped because these parts right here, these metal parts, are wider than what this was made for. Because we looked at them. First I thought these were just stretched out from age on the original one, but no, they're actually wider. So I can't use the original one because that's all dry rotted and junk. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use this one here, and I'm just going to stuff it in here like this, and then I'm going to get a hose clamp, and I'm going to put a hose clamp around this whole thing and clamp it in there, and that should be fine. Alright, so now I got a clamp on there, and that's not going to go anywhere. That's fine. So now I got to replace the wire that was on the starter here because, well, it's all burnt off, melted, trashed. But unfortunately they use a very unusual little crimp-on connector on the end of this, because it'd be too easy if they just put a regular, eye on there, eyelet type of connector. So the way that this works is this has got threads in it so that it goes underneath the underside here, and then a screw goes through the top and screws into it. So the problem with this setup is I can't just put a screw through here, an eyelet with a screw, because there's nothing for it to thread into. I could try and put a nut on the back side, but there's not much room in there between the back side of this and this rivet or whatever the heck is right there. So I mean, that's like, the amount of clearance in there as it is pretty slim. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can use the remnants of this connector as kind of like a makeshift nut.
That's smart.
Yeah, well, we'll see how smart it is. All right, back down here on the workbench, I cut off a lot of this damaged and melted plastic to expose this wire in the hopes that I would be able to see what gauge this wire was. And unfortunately, the only markings on it are the name of the company that makes this wire. Seems like it should be marked somewhere along here in this much length. Unless it's back here where it's melted on and I can't get the plastic off. Tried on this end too, no markings. So I'm just going to cut this wire and get a, well actually, this wire actually seems like it's in pretty decent shape. I'm now tempted to just maybe reuse this wire. This wire might have been, well no, this was on the starter.
Then what?
I don't know. I wonder how much longer this wire was originally. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So let's do this. Let's cut this wire.
Where?
Right here.
Why?
What? Why not?
That's a lot of wires.
Yeah. That looks like about number 10 gauge wire. Well, let me see what I got. Well, after a little fooling around, I was able to determine that, unfortunately, this wire gauge is number 8 gauge wire. And the reason why that's unfortunate is because I have a huge roll of 10 gauge red wire. But so we went to Advanced Auto Parts store, and because unfortunately the local Napa didn't have wire by the foot in 8 gauge, they only had 10 gauge, and they sell 8 gauge wire here in a 6-foot roll. $9 for that, so that's unfortunate. But hey, you know, copper's expensive, right? Yeah, it's expensive until you go to bring scrap motors to the scrap yard for recycling copper wire. Then all of a sudden they're worth 12 cents a pound if you know, well, get 15 cents a pound if you're lucky. But anyways, I digress. So I found a terminal, ring terminal, that will actually fit in between these two metal pieces right here. So then now I can go with the plan of using this as a backing, almost like a nut on the backside. So hopefully that'll work. I wonder if this screw, which is in better shape than that one, I wonder if this happens to be the same thread. That would be nice. Oh, it is. Oh, you know what? I think I'm going to use this screw that we basically stole out of that terminal block. All right, so we get a temporary, well, actually permanent wire. We get this wired up. A couple of things I noticed. It's crazy how little clearance there is between the back side of this screw when you screw it in and this metal part right here, which is ground. So the only thing stopping this from shorting out is literally millimeters. So I bent that up a little bit to compensate for that. There was on the original cable, there was a rubber boot that covered this that was completely dry rotted and trashed. So ideally we're gonna have to come up with some kind of a solution to cover this, figure something out. And then up here we got the connection on the new starter relay. So we're just gonna temporarily try and power this to see if we can get this to run. The starter, I mean. That's what I'm saying. We want to see if we can crank the starter. So we're going to use the starter charger. That should be plenty of power to run this little starter. All right. So I got 12 volts coming in here. We got the grounded to the case. So now, if I take this wire here, if I ground this, touch this to this, it should... Alright, that's not working. Let's see. Well, let's start with the basics. Let's see if we put 12 volts direct to this, we should hear this relay closing, clicking, clacking. No. Okay. Put this on engine start. There we go. Alright, so I had a less than ideal connection there. Alright, so now let me put this back on to the case.
Starter doesn't want to move.
That's weird. Alright, let's try to put 12 volts directly to the starter on this side.
What happened?
The starter charger just reset, protected itself as if like it's shorted. I wonder if you get a bad starter. No, that's working. Oh, look at the big burn mark I put on the brand new. It was so pretty and I made it ugly. That's it. It's working.
Compression release switch. I think it has that.
What are you talking about?
Compression release switch.
Hey, good luck saying that. All right. What are you doing?
Taking video.
What, from 6 inches away?
Yes.
What do you get a shot of? This?
That when you're doing it.
You're a hell of a cameraman.